look at that, and that is fine with me.
Okay.
At the time, the reason that I asked for governance committee to come back with perhaps change in the governance. What
The
is
governance, strategic governance manual?
that? What do we call it? Governance manual.
Yes.
Governance manual was that onus should be on the board members themselves as opposed to chairman or clerk of the board to take it appropriate for a board member to use fund it this way or that way.
Okay.
So board members should take the responsibility of self-monitoring, self-disciplining, and use the resources.
Okay. Ms. Corbett Sanders?
I want to thank the governance committee for addressing this issue. I know that it was a concern that was raised by Mr. Moon, and others have expressed concerns, especially with the limited amount of money that is available to school board members for professional development, and I fully support the changes here. I would also suggest that we may consider, as part of our budget process, restoring the professional development funds levels that were available to this board prior to the changes that I believe were made in 2017.
So could I see, I don't see any other, Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes, as one of the members on governance, what I wanted to just reinforce is what Mr. Moon had said. For anyone in the public who ends up following this issue, unlike the board supervisors that are essentially funded about $500,000 each per year to run their magisterial districts, that is not the case at all with the school board members. So in terms of the, what are we at, Madam Clerk, 20, is it 2,000 or 2,400 that we have? How much? 2,400 for professional development each year, which if any of us choose to go to the National School Board Association Conference, as well as the Virginia School Board Association Conference, just those two alone for our professional development with both of our state and national associations, you can't do that right now in 2,400. Like, I did not go to the Virginia School Board Association Conference this year for the first time in my 7 years on the board. And if I choose to go to Philadelphia for the NSBA, with the estimated costs, I would absolutely have not had enough money to go to both. So, you know, we need to, as this board, no matter who serves on the next board, position the next board better, that we are elected officials. The public elects us with the trust that we're going to govern a $3 billion operation. So if we can't responsibly and professionally manage our professional development funds, we certainly aren't in a position to do anything else. So I'm very pleased with this language because I think it demonstrates the fact that the board has confidence in each other to be able to make these responsible decisions when it comes to professional development.
Thank you. Ms. Strauss?
I'm fine with the language. I'm just reminding my colleagues that when we were cutting the budget so much, every department was cutting, and we had to hold back some of the funds in our school board office as well. So it wasn't just a decision based on trying to restrict opportunities for school board members. It was just everyone having to help with the shortfall in the budget. So at any rate, that was why that was done. So thanks. I think the language is fine.
Thank you. Mr. McElveen?
So actually, I'm glad Tammy just walked in because, you know, I remember when she was chair, we had upped it, I think, to 4,000 per board member.
We did.
And I think we had that maybe for 1 or 2 years. I thought that was an appropriate level because I wouldn't necessarily exhaust it, but I could come close to it. And I could feel like I was getting adequate professional development in addition to the VSBA and NSBA. So I think the language is fine, but I do hope as a board we get back to that level. I thought that was appropriate.
Okay. Any other board member? Ms. Derenak-Kovacs?
Sorry, I was a little late. So we're just talking about number 4 right now?
Yes.
All right. Yes, Mr. McElveen is right. When I was the chair, I felt that what I wanted to do, if we wanted to do if we wanted to do both VSBA and NSBA, it wasn't, that was all you were able to do. Did you talk about, I'm okay with this language, but did you all talk about, the need to enhance the professional development funds at all?
No, that wasn't.
I know that's not really part of
No,
this, but
the amount of the money wasn't the topic.
I raised it
It was how we.
tonight.
tonight, okay.
But yes, Ms. Corbett Sanders had said something about putting some money back into the budget, and that would be the appropriate venue for doing this. This came about as a forum topic a couple of years ago. Mr. Moon had asked us to take a look at this, and so we're coming back just on how it's determined how the funds will be used. And there's no nothing in here about the amount.
Okay. All right, then I'm fine with that. And yes, for historical perspective, that's the way it happened. Then 2 years later, we had to cut it because of everybody was doing across the board cuts. We did cut it at that time. And, right now I'm wrestling a little bit. I went to VSBA, I'm going to NSBA, and I was asked to be on our federal relations network, and that they're having a conference this weekend. The conference is quite expensive, and I'm probably, but because I've been asked, I'm probably, going to go over, so we'll have to figure out how we're going to be able to pay for that. I might share some of your funds, colleagues, but I was asked by NSA people to be part of that because I was the federal legislative liaison. This year I'm not, and so they just like continuity from time to time. So that's quite expensive, and also, you have to get back and forth to DC because we feel like we don't want to do a hotel, and it's just really the conference cost is expensive, and getting back and forth to the city, even if you drive yourself, you're paying for parking. It's a lot, and so it's not something that you can do if you are one of those people, one of those few people that go to that every year. But every year our board does have a couple people go to that. So I hope we will bring that hopefully up, when we talk about the budget.
So with that, could I get a sense of whether we have consensus on adopting this language? We're just looking at the language in number 4. Could I see how many people can support that language? Okay, that is consensus, so we will move forward with that. We have 2 other topics tonight from governance. One is the 3-minute rule. If you look at the clerk has also posted some language here. There was a sense that the 3-minute rule worked well when we had our conversation at the retreat, and the governance committee took a look at that and is recommending to the full board that as part of our work sessions that we follow a 3-minute rule, where we've done this a couple of times now at work sessions where the meeting managers have suggested this. The idea not being to cut anyone off, but simply to say on your first round you'll limit yourself to 3 minutes and then move on to the another board member, with the idea being that everybody should have an initial turn rather than each member continuing through all of their questions and answers. So I will throw this out for conversation, and again, this is the recommendation of the governance committee to the full board. Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Evans, and thank you to the governance committee for bringing this forward. I felt that this was an excellent approach that we used in our most recent retreat. as well as it has been used sporadically in some of our work sessions. And I think it shows self-discipline by restricting it to 3 minutes. The other piece of it is that we ask people who come before us to be succinct in their remarks. And so I think that this is a good recommendation, and one that provides similar self-restraint that we ask of our community. And so I very much support the 3-minute rule with the ability to go back. There is one question I have, which is, would we stop the clock once the board member has finished speaking, to give the opportunity for staff to respond and then restart the clock? That is an approach which is used in many governing bodies.
I'll say the way I believe the governance committee looked at this, and then my governance committee fellow members can weigh in. I believe our idea was that people could take 3 minutes, make initial comments, ask initial questions, and then staff could answer to a certain extent, but that the comments and questions would go no more than 3 minutes, and then staff would have an opportunity. That's my understanding of what we agreed. And I'm seeing nods from Ms. McLaughlin and Ms. Amara. So, in other words, you would get your 3 minutes, and then staff would have an opportunity to respond. I next have Ms. Strauss and then Ms. Hines.
I think this is fine. It is actually the way the county council conducts its large meetings, and we've talked about this approach before. And I think it's fine. People need to all agree to be patient with each other and not push the time limit. So I think it's worth trying.
Thank you, Mrs. Strauss. Ms. Hines.
Yeah, I do think it's a good idea. I like the idea of trying to put out all your questions and comments first and then let staff respond, because one of the things that I don't think we want to do is cut off staff or rush staff, or especially when we have visitors, people who are presenting to us and they're with staff, right? That can be embarrassing. And what we really want is to hear from them more, I think, than from me, And I think the reason that it's worthwhile to have a consensus about this is because what we see is, instead, if we don't, then the meeting manager is like doing this dance with everybody the whole time. And I feel badly, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, is it 3 minutes? Is it 6 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? And we spend a lot of time deciding how many minutes. And if we just have a rule and we live with it for a while, and we're all really self-disciplined about it for a while, and then, if we find it's not enough, we can change it. But right now, it's just kind of unfair to the meeting managers to have a lack of clarity about it.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes. Again, on governance, we were all very much in agreement with it, because we did see how well we thought it worked at the retreat. But I do want to say that Ms. Hines, I completely agree that part of living by and abiding by it, I think, is the consistency piece. Like, a couple times I think we've tried it over the last 7 years, but it really wasn't with fidelity. And so then it became that certain board members were allowed to talk longer, and then other board members would push back on it and say, well, you gave this person that amount of time and I need to have my time. What I like about the 3 minutes is not so much about because board members really don't have anything valuable to say, is more a matter of focus. We know that the human brain can only go so long listening to any one voice in one person. So as board members, if we want to get a key, topic addressed in your 3 minutes, you can speak to it and then ask staff if there's anything they want to add to it. And then it is the opportunity, which we have not necessarily done in the past, but I felt we were really good, and I want hats off to Ms. Kieskamara, who ran our most recent work session, that people were comfortable with 3 minutes, knowing that after everybody's had their 3 minutes, then we'll start the round again, and people, because some board members do delve more deeply into topics, and they do have more questions that I think are meaningful. And I do look at our work sessions as they are our work sessions. The public knows that by law, we're not supposed to be conversing with one another beyond 2 board members at a time unless it's a public meeting. So our work sessions are not necessarily for staff to just talk to us in a Q&A. It's for us to talk with each other. And so, yes, part of the work session is to get information from staff to inform this shared dialogue. But at times I've worried that our work sessions, we're not working with each other. We're just all 12 stray cats asking questions, and then we go back to, you know, reviewing where our positions are in certain things, and then it takes a lot more phone calls after that. So I think the public also benefits from our being able to speak to an issue, ask the questions, understand where board members are. But I'm very optimistic that it will take having 2 meeting managers, because you've got one person who's got to be managing the meeting and the other person running the clock. And so I do think we just have to be mindful of that. But I'm glad it sounds like there's support for it.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Derenak-Kopax to be followed by Mr. McElwain.
So I'm glad, Ms. McLaughlin, you brought up that there was various attempts. I will push back a little bit. There was fidelity of implementation, and so much so that we had a clock. We have a clock on our timer for us to look at. I don't know if it was taken down chairs after me, but we had a clock up there that said, we need to, this is how long you speak. And then, but the clock didn't run till, you were supposed to self-regulate till 3 minutes. The clock would go on and on and on and on. And then what happened was board members would get angry if you were called out on it. And so I appreciate your comments, Ms. Hines. This started out with streamline and focus, because this was 7 years ago, and we were having these problems of having board meetings till 1 o'clock in the morning with regularity. There was different attempts, and what happens when you use this 3-minute rule, if you are judicious, oftentimes board members talked over each other and said, no, this is an important topic, I need to talk about this. So I'm all for it. But don't say there wasn't fidelity, because there was. There was a committee, a subcommittee done. There were clocks put up on the. There were clocks put up at Luther Jackson, and the thing is you can't get angry. I don't care how passionate you are on the topic. If we're going to agree to this, you have to agree to it. And if it's your topic that you're primarily, it's the most important thing to you, you still only have 3 minutes. Doesn't matter. So if we agree to this, that's fine. But we've tried several times. It wasn't a thing that worked for us. But if we're willing to all try again and be honest with each other and actually stop and actually not get angry, and we can also use the clock. We can go back and use the clock. I don't know, Eileen, is it there? Eileen, is that clock there still? Yep. Okay.
Are you finished? I have Mr. McElwain to be followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. So I'm not an expert in the history. I think both Tammy and Megan were both on the Hocus Pocus committee. But I do believe that the
Very disrespectful, Mr. McElwain.
the 3-minute rule was an outgrowth of that, right? Wasn't that okay? So that has been put towards us before, I'm right. Right. Okay. But I do support it. I think there are times, and this is where it gets tricky, where certain board members do bring a certain expertise. If we're talking about start times, does that mean we cut Sandy off at 3 minutes? If we're talking about environmental sustainability, we cut Pat off at 3 minutes. So I think that's going to be a question that remains to be answered. But Again, I think 3 minutes is a good guideline. I think I'm not exactly sure. I mean, our clerk says that the Dan Stork funded clock is still there. I'm not sure where it actually sits. Okay, so I mean, but I do think if we adopt this rule, this room also will need a clock. So I don't know if the clock will be mobile between
The
here
clock
and
was on the camera. Or
right,
on
right,
the
but the
podium.
camera is no longer
Yeah,
there.
it was there.
Right.
You have it if it's not there, but it was.
Because it was an $800 clock, and it's
Yeah.
right. Which yes. So anyway, we need it in both locations.
Ms. Keys Gamara?
I missed the Hocus Pocus committee. That sounded fun. I do support this, as you is probably no surprise to my colleagues. I certainly try to be respectful in implementing it, and it's harder, quite frankly, when people seek answers from staff in the middle. So I would encourage us to think about this in terms of I'm going to make my full statement and then give staff an opportunity, because it's just easier. Although I did try to manage it, or I've seen others try to manage that, but I'm all for boundaries and discipline, and I think what the end result ended up being is that more people had more opportunities to speak and think about what they wanted to say. And I think in some instances we had 3, maybe 4 go backs. So maybe not all in each of the situations, but so I do support it. I think it lent itself toward everybody having more opportunity.
So before going to go backs, I'll just briefly say I do support this. I think I think it has worked for us when we've used it. I do want to point out this is a reference just to work sessions, that we didn't make a statement, at least governance didn't. We could always go back and look at our regular board meetings, but I think when we've used it in our work sessions and at our retreat, this has worked well. And also, just to reiterate, people can have as many go backs as they want. So I think one of the things we're doing here is making sure that all 12 board members get one opportunity to make their main comments and get their main questions out without having to wait for a very long time. So, but it doesn't cut anybody off from going back and making more comments and asking more questions. And I think that's important, because particularly at work sessions, and I agree with Ms. McLaughlin that that interaction is important. And I think this actually will lend itself to better interaction if everybody has one chance to make their statements and before we go to a second round. So I think that this will help us focus. And I did neglect to mention one thing that we had recommended as well, and I've already violated it in this work session. We're recommending that at our work sessions that the meeting managers sit at that end of the table. And the reason for that is, if we're all focused on our speakers here, then it sometimes people down at this end have to like wave and write notes and all of that to get the meeting manager's attention. So our thought was that if they're down at this end, they can be watching here, but also watching for board members. So I don't know how we would work that around. I guess it would be, either there or over there, but that's a small point, but we thought that would be better too. So I have at least one go back. Ms. McLaughlin?
So as an American history major in college, Ms. Koufax, I hope you can appreciate my wanting to lend a little more history to your recollections, because we know history can be recalled in different ways. So with Streamline and Focus, I don't recall that it was necessary that we were going to go to 3 minutes. What I do remember with the clock where it was a problem is it was just timing people. And then we had a board member who was logging it in. And the problem is it wasn't how long a board member spoke, it was their turn, which if you had a loquacious staff member who answered your question, your 4 or 5 minutes of asking a question, speaking to it, coupled by 5 minutes of a staff response meant you were getting logged in as you took 10 minutes. So I think what's nice about this approach is we are trying to be much more mindful about our own words in a finite period of time. And it isn't a matter of if you happen to have gone 2 minutes, asked a question that took a 4-minute response, and suddenly you're being, labeled as you took 6 minutes when you really only took 2, but you happened to ask a substantive question. So I don't think people are going to be necessarily angry by this approach, because we are looking at a way of saying, speak to your 3 minutes, you're signaled, and then you're being given a chance to go back as needed.
Before I go to Mrs. Strauss, I'm going to go to Mr. Moon, who hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you. I'm going to support this new approach and see whether this will work. And if not, well, then we will come back again and do more discussion. And I also remember long ago, I think most of us were still on the board at the time, that we tried color-coded time limitations. Remember that? Like a 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute. Sort of like we had 3 colors and 2 meetings that, for example, that, if your 3 minutes is not enough, then you can add just 1 more minute using that, and now you will have 2 minutes left for the rest of the work session. I know that didn't last long, but something I think that's worth. But I'm gonna give a try for this one, and hopefully we can all, in good faith, abide by that.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Mrs. Strauss, I think you have the last word before we make a decision.
Okay, thank you. In Streamline and Focus, we looked at many different permutations of this, and I'm glad actually that we're not going back to the strict Roberts rules, because that was something probably before any of you were born that we had talked about, and which is actually maybe the approach when you have hundreds of people in difficult debate, and which is far too strict. And I think that this gives us, I think, enough of a structure and hopefully some self-discipline. So I support this, and I would not support going back to a strict Roberts rules. I think that's too confining, and I think people would be upset with that.
Ms. Derenak Kofax has a comment as well.
I'm just going to ask the clerk if you can pull up, because I couldn't pull it up real quick, if you can just send that to all of us again, recommendations from Streamline and Focus. That happened probably 7 years ago. 6 years ago, maybe, till we got the recommendations. 6 years. Yeah, 2013.
That would be good to have.
You can
that
help
for
me.
history.
Yeah, and that way we can see if there's anything else in there.
Okay. So if I could see a show of hands of those who can support this approach. All right, and that is unanimous. So we will include that in our strategic governance manual when we bring you the, and we can enact that now. I mean, I'm assuming that with that consensus, we can move forward with that. We have one more topic tonight from governance, and that is the proposed retreat. So I have 2 questions to ask the board. We have set aside February 23rd and 24th as a potential date for the retreat. And so my first question to the board is if we want to have a retreat on those 2 dates, if those 2 dates work for a retreat, and then if the answer to that is yes, the governance committee had a couple of ideas on topics. We're going to refine them and refine our approach if the board wants to have a retreat on those days. But that's my first question to the board, is if we want to have a retreat on February 23rd and 24th. Oh, I'm sorry, is that the Friday and Saturday? I'm sorry, 22 and 23. Is there a discussion? If there's not discussion, I guess we could just go to. Okay. Let's have a show of hands of how many people are interested in having a retreat on February 22nd and 23rd. Well. Okay. Well, I can tell you what the governance committee has discussed so far, and we wanted to get the ideas of board members as well, so we could hone it down further. The 3 issues that have come up so far in the governance committee has been to look at the big issues that we want to tackle in our final year of this board. That was one idea that was raised. Another was to look at the issue of mental health, because that's a topic that keeps coming up, and So one suggestion was that. Another conversation, it's an ongoing conversation, is communications strategies, intra-board and superintendent to the board. That was another comment. Ms. McLaughlin, did you want to make a comment about this?
Just quickly, that since I've been on the board for these 2 terms, it was my understanding that the board tried to have retreats twice a year because it is about improving board function and relationship, and also looking at macro level issues that extend beyond the work session. So I would hope that there's going to be support when the question was asked, do we even want to retreat? I think that's something that has been a strong and positive tradition, and I hope we do it.
Ms. Hines?
Yeah, I was ready to just say, yeah, let's, vote on whether to have a retreat first. But then I also deciding to have a meeting and then trying to figure out why we're having a meeting just seem a little backwards, So, I get that it's a tradition. Now, the 3 ideas that you put forward, maybe I'm wrong, but it sounds like the first 2 sound like policy discussions, or maybe not. Maybe the first one, when you say what things we want to get done this year, are those more board governance? Because I think of retreats as board governance, board superintendent, relationship, communication, those sorts of things. So like mental wellness, that sounds to me more like policy. I'm not sure. I could be wrong. And I think the first one, if it were about what board governance things we want to get done this year, I think that would fit. I don't know. What do you think?
The idea, and this was Mr. Wilson originally brought this up, and my understanding of what he had in mind was basically to take a look at the big issues and not decide them that night, but to decide what do we want to achieve. So that would be a combination of policy and governance. Mental wellness, I have to think that would be a policy discussion. Now, we certainly have had policy discussions in retreats. We have looked at the strategic plan. We've had lengthy retreats on the strategic plan. So we haven't always had it be just about governance. We have had policy discussions as part of it. Mr. Moon? And Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
I'm actually very glad that you put the 3 potential topics out for discussion as a precursor to deciding whether or not we should have a retreat. We'll tell you that with these 3 topics, the only one that I think warrants having a retreat would be, rather than using the term big issues to address in the last 7 months of the board, or actually it's 10 months, I would suggest that it would be board priorities for the last 10 months. With the issue of mental health has been on our agenda numerous times. We have the Mental Health and Wellness Conference, and we have quite a bit of work there. Now, if we wanted to focus the big issue of what do we want to accomplish in mental health and wellness in the last 10 months, maybe that would be a way of combining the 2. But as far as communication strategies between the board and the superintendent, I think we've had sufficient conversations about that in our retreats that I'm not convinced another retreat on that subject is necessary.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McLaughlin?
One of the things governance was hoping for was definitely board members to hear these suggestions and definitely think of maybe others where you'd want to focus. This was just sort of the initial considerations that we looked at. I do think that one of the reasons we brought up the whole point about the superintendent board communications is that when Dr. Brabrand joined us about 1.5 years ago, there was an effort in his first year to talk about how we could improve communications. And, with any new process, new leader, there's trying to, roll it out and then see how it's working, make adjustments as needed. And I know from watching emails among our board and Dr. Braybrand, we're still trying to find a workable process and for Dr. Braybrand to understand, what are the things that board members want to hear from, in what manner they want to hear it. And, the student surveys is just one example. I mean, we're trying to now sort through and understand that from Dr. Braybrand, but that's a perfect example that the community emailed us over the weekend saying, how come Fairfax County asked for a waiver on climate surveys for students? So that would be an example of where the retreat will be valuable to, yes, you can maybe talk about examples, but the goal is to then have that shared dialogue. And our work sessions are so packed in that the beauty of a retreat is to say, just how can we do better work together as a team and working with Dr. Braybrand. And so I do think that it's not about trying to flesh out some more change. It's more of a temperature check. How's it going? And, maybe we need to give more clarity. I mean, Dr. Braybrand has the lovely task of answering to 12 different personalities. So on top of his own leadership team, which is, also, people coming from different perspectives. There's a lot of voices coming into those 2 ears of his. So I think it could be beneficial. But I do like the idea when we're talking about mental health. Ms. Hines asked if that's policy work. What I loved, quoting Kathy Smith, our former colleague who I served on governance with for a couple years, she always talked about retreats as the big idea conversations. It's not like direct policy work of what are we going to do tomorrow in this division about this. It's more about a global conversation. What do we know what's happening in Fairfax County schools? What's happening nationally around student health and mental health issues and trends? And so I think it could be an excellent retreat topic as well.
Mrs. Strauss?
If we're going to have a retreat, I would rather this time focus on student issues, whatever they are, mental health or academic achievement. It's been a long time since this board has had a long, thorough discussion on some important student issues, and not necessarily on ourselves, but I think on the kids. That's what I would prefer.
Do I have any other comments before I see what the consensus is? All right, with Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
I just wanted to ask, I know this was one of our questions in our meeting, is whether there were other topics that we haven't brought forth, but others felt should be considered for the retreat.
Right. Mr. Moon?
So I'm not sure whether we are trying to talk about topics first or trying to decide whether we're gonna have one or not. Or
Go ahead and address any or all. Go ahead and address both.
I'm somewhat meeting fatigue. That we have a lot of work ahead of us, and especially this year being an election year. There are some retiring board members, but there are also board members running for a different office, running for re-election. We have a budget, CIP, discipline issues, many other topics, all have to be scheduled and discussed. Even though I may want to honor our tradition of holding 2 retreats a year, not sure whether we need to hold those 2-day retreats in February timeframe, and know that in 9 months time, 9-10 months from now, we will have at least 5 new board members join us. We'll certainly need to hold several retreats with the new board members and superintendent. Considering all that, I am not so certain whether we need to have a retreat in February.
Ms. Hines?
I mean, I think another consideration is staff time. And I know that staff will support whatever we want to do, so it's because you always do, and thank you. But I think we should probably consider it, because whenever we have a retreat, staff really does a lot of work ahead of time. And then we always have, 28 next steps whenever we get together and talk. So there'll be work afterwards as well. So anyway, it's just a consideration. If we don't have something burning we feel we need to do in February, then maybe that should count into the calculus of whether to have the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to see whether the board believes we should have a retreat in February. If the answer is no, then we're done for now. If the answer is yes, then I'm going to ask if we want to have a 1 day of retreat or 2. And after that, I will ask some questions about topics. So let me see how many people would like to have a retreat in February. All right. Well, in that case, we will not have a retreat in February. What the governance committee can do, we can start planning for a retreat at a later time, and bring you back something that it will be, since it will be later in the year, and we'll be closer to the end of this term. We'll have to think carefully about what we want to be doing with that time. Ms. Palchuk?
Yeah, I don't know if this was mentioned already, but I know Ms. Corbett Sanders and I discussed with our partnership and communication staff the possibility of, I'm thinking for this later retreat, doing a service project together. So I don't know how my board members feel. I know we looked at food for others, something else, just to have it be that the social aspect, giving back and helping us collaborate in a different way. So.
And you would, and your suggestion would be to do that instead of a board retreat? Is that your, or as part of a board
In
retreat?
conjunction, sometimes we
Okay.
have, 2 days, we have an evening component and a morning.
Okay.
So maybe, that could be the
Okay.
evening component with dinner, just to help bring a
Okay.
little bit of that.
I will put that down on the list of things for us to consider, and Madam Clerk, please remind me if I've got it on my notes, but who knows what'll happen to them. That's an interesting suggestion. Dr. Brabrand.
Yes, Ms. Evans, I just wanted to share with the board, just listening, because a couple of you brought up social emotional. There's a group, and I don't know if Debbie Tyler's down yet, but that has reached out to me and has asked me to come before Congress and talk about social emotional supports and federal funding for additional work. And they're going to have a group of different districts. I've already reached out with Teresa to get Marianne Panarelli to help. The National Superintendents Association, AASA, and the executive director is Dan Dominich, who many of you remember, is actually starting to pull together a smaller group of school districts to look at social emotional supports. That they're just really beginning, and they're looking at what we're doing as a model. But this is a topic that I know continues to be one. It's being put in our strategic plan. We've added in some additional factors. If that's something long-term that is a topic and we have enough time, we could certainly prepare where we are now and where we need to go. And we've been talking about MTSS with our principals, multi-tiered systems of support. We've done really great in Fairfax with academic supports over the years, and we're building in now and realizing the need for the same level of intensity and clarity around social emotional supports. So just something to think about is one of the topics I heard that resonates with some of the national discussion, state discussion, and local discussion, that is an area that if it ends up being a retreat topic or even a work session topic, we could be glad to update the board on where we're at and hear what our community is still saying with concerns.
All right, thank you very much. And so I appreciate everybody's work on this, and this governance work session is adjourned. I believe, do we need 3 minutes between? Okay, so we'll take a very quick 3-minute break.